Hey, this is Mike from the Run Testers, and this is our multi-tester review of the Brooks Hyperion Elite 4. So here's the key details for the Brooks Hyperion Elite 4. It's priced at £220 in the UK or $250 in the US, putting it below other carbon racing shoes like the Nike Alpha Fly 3, New Balance SC Elite V4, Hoka Cielo X1, and it's closer to shoes like the Saucony Endorphin Pro 4. Weight-wise, our UK men's size 8 Elite 4 weighed in at 216 grams compared to 237 grams on the Elite 3. It's got an 8mm drop like the Elite 3, though the stack heights have changed. It measures in at 40mm at the heel and 32mm at the forefoot. There is more of Brooks's EVA and nitrogen-infused DNA Flash V2 cushioning tech that Brooks says is now lighter than a DNA Flash inside of the 3 and promises a boost in energy return. That's joined by a redesigned full-length Speedvolt Race Plus carbon plate that, along with a rapid roll rocker, is there to give you that more propulsive feeling for faster days and race days. While the upper remains a knitted style one, it's been revamped to be lighter and more breathable than the upper on the Elite 3, with internal padding at the heel to help keep things locked down at the back. The outsole pattern has changed, showing off that redesigned carbon plate a little more than its predecessor.
So in testing, I ran in my regular Brooks running shoe size, which is a UK 8.5, US 9.5, and I got on well with these true to size. I had to pay some attention to how I laced down to avoid heel slipping, but generally for me, they have a pretty simple, unfussy fit. I really like the airiness of the uppers and the toe box. That's enhanced by these kind of really heavily sort of perforated uppers that feel really sort of light and roomy. I did have some heel rubbing when I did the marathon test until I got that lacing locked in. But overall, I think I'd recommend going true to size in these.
So I'd say the fit has probably been one of the highlights for me in my time with the Brooks Hyperion Elite 4. Now, I've had mine in a UK size 8. That is my typical running shoe size. I've got pretty skinny, narrow feet. So when it comes to getting into these kind of racing shoes, which are generally more narrow, it's been absolutely fine for me. But I would say that the general nature, the design, and particularly the upper material does make it a little bit more accommodating. I think if you have got slightly wider feet, I think you shouldn't have a problem compared to some other kind of racing shoes where you really have to kind of squeeze into. Well, I think it's definitely a different story here on the Hyperion Elite 4. Very happy with the space up front in the toes in terms of distance I wanted to do in this shoe. In terms of the midfoot, the hold is generally pretty good. As I said, it naturally does feel a little bit more roomy compared to some other racing shoes. And then you've got a good level of padding at the heel here, particularly in the inside of the heel collar, which helps improve that kind of lockdown, make sure there's no slipping, and I haven't really had any slippage or issues from that point of view. In terms of the tongue and the laces, generally fine in terms of getting a good lockdown there. I have found an occasion where I have had a little bit of lace bite on the top of my feet, but generally when I've played around with the lacing, it's been fine. So based on my testing, I would say go true to size. I found it okay in my UK size 8, and I do think it naturally is a little bit more accommodating compared to some other kind of narrow fitting racing super shoes.
So I actually went half a size down with the Brooks Hyperion Elite 4. It is a UK 8.5, which is a US 9.5. Now, I'm generally a US 9.5 or a US 10 in most running shoes. It varies between brands a little bit. And with Brooks, I tend to find if I get a US 10, sometimes it can come up a little bit long. And in a racing shoe, you definitely don't want that. That's what happened with the Hyperion Elite 3. So going down half a size was right for me with this shoe. I'd say if you're in between sizes, maybe the smaller one might be the one to go for. But I had a really good fit all round in this half size down. Nice hold around the heel and midfoot, enough room in the toe box even for longer distances. So yeah, I think it'll probably be around your normal running shoe size, especially in the US, but if you're right in between two sizes, I would lean to go into the smaller one. So I've run about 55, 60k in the Hyperion Elite 4, using it for a mix of marathon training runs. I've done a couple of progression runs in the shoe, moving from easy, swiftly through the gears towards kind of my marathon pace by the end. And I've done a tough track session in the shoe where I did 3 sets of 2k, then 5 times 400 meter reps. So a longer rep at around kind of 10k half marathon pace, and then some shorter reps, 400 meter reps at more like 5k pace. I've also tested each generation of the shoe up to this point, and it's never been the most outstanding option on the market, and I think that does remain the case here with the Hyperion Elite 4. There are some improvements here. It's a higher stack shoe, it's softer. I think it is better all round than the Hyperion Elite 3, which I didn't really rate as a very good shoe at all because it was very heavy for one. The upper was very heavy on that shoe, had quite an awkward fit, and it was a downgrade, I think, on the Hyperion Elite 2, which itself wasn't the most amazing shoe. But when I heard that Brooks updated the midsole foam on the Elite 4, I was excited. I was hoping that basically they were going to follow the trend of the market, put in a PEBA-based foam or some kind of foam that's soft and springy and it delivers that propulsive feeling you expect from a super shoe. The DNA Flash V2, isn't really that. It is a bit lighter and bouncier than the previous version of the foam, but it still doesn't really give you that punch that you expect from a carbon super shoe at this kind of price. And that's really the problem I think the shoe has, is the price. Because it does have a fast ride. Like, I was really impressed with actually on that track session where I went into what was a long session in the afternoon after a busy morning. I wasn't really feeling it, but hit the pace really well. It's got a nice turnover. And actually on a track, it feels a little bit bouncier and a bit softer. It was more on the road, I think, where you really felt the lack of punch compared to other shoes. Like doing those progression runs, moving through the gears, it just doesn't feel as easy and enjoyable as with a super shoe from another brand. Like, it's just a bit harder to put the work in the shoe. It's hard to sustain good paces, I find, because you're not getting the punch from the foam. It turns over quite nicely. It's got a firmish feel, which is quite nice for running quick. I think it's quite stable when you're rounding corners and that kind of thing, but it just doesn't give you that feeling underfoot that you expect from a super shoe. And also I think it can err on the harsh, slightly firm side when you start to run longer distances. By the end of even just kind of 10 miles in the shoe, I was starting to feel it a little bit under the forefoot compared to, again, other super shoes. And really the comparison is the problem here. Like, on its own, I quite enjoyed running in the Hyperion Elite 4. It's a fast shoe, turns over well, you get a bit of punch from the foam in the plate here. It's just, right now with testing so many other carbon shoes, lots of brands are releasing them, and they're just delivering more effective rides that are bouncier, more fun, more explosive, and they're lighter shoes and things like that. And it just all adds up to the feeling that Brooks is just a little bit behind. The foam just isn't there yet, and on the run test, like, I enjoyed using the shoe, it was okay, but it wasn't one that delivered the feeling underfoot that I expected or really hoped for when I saw that Brooks had made some big changes to the shoe.
So Insight Run Test, and I've done just 50k in the Brooks Hyperion Elite 4, and that includes the half marathon race test that myself and Kieran did out in Barcelona. I did some mileage before I went out. Came back, wanted to try do some speed work with it, see if it worked for kind of shorter, sharper stuff, but also mainly see if it was a shoe that I wanted or would want to run a marathon or longer kind of marathon training runs in it ultimately. Now, I'll start with the good stuff. And the first thing I think really kind of stood out for me really in my time is the fact that it is a nice light shoe, and it's exactly what you want from a racing shoe. Now, you don't forget about it, but it definitely does disappear a lot more than some other kind of marathon focused racing shoes that I've tested. So Brooks definitely has that in its favor, I think, and that's something to definitely take through into the next shoe. The outsole is great. I like the fact that the outsole, there's good grip here. I've run mainly in dry conditions, but I have had one rainy run in it, and it's been fine in terms of grip and traction. It feels like it's going to be durable as well, and I think it's a shoe you're going to be able to train and race in. The distance you're going to race in, that is kind of where I get into the not so great stuff about the Hyperion Elite 4. And I think in terms of experience of running in this shoe, I think there's some good elements. So from the ride point of view, I think there's, a little bit of bounce there, enough bounce, I think, to keep you kind of going through a run. I think the rocker is a real kind of nice kind of quality here. It kind of smoothly gets you from that kind of heel to toe and those transitions. So I think from that point of view, that is definitely a nice hallmark of my time running in the Hyperion Elite 4. I think ultimately it still does feel a little bit too firm for me. I do think it needs a little bit more cushion. I think the cushioning system, and I think Brooks will be honest and say this, it probably does still need a little bit of work to make it more suitable for running distance or feeling good to run longer distance. Because ultimately when I got to kind of, I think the 10 mile point, did I want to go further in the shoe, or did I feel like I wanted a little bit more out of the shoe in that midsole? I definitely did, and it kind of put me off wanting to run a little bit longer in the shoe. And I do feel like it maxes out kind of that half marathon distance based on my time. But there are elements I do think work from the ride. As I said, there's a bit of bounce there. The rebound is generally good. The rocket is very nice there as well. It's stable as a shoe as well. I just think it's not got that aggressive, propulsive feel for the midsole that, other shoes, particularly around this price range, kind of really do give you. And I just think, as I said, the cushioning the midsole needs a bit of work, I think, to make it more suitable for running longer distances, because I don't think it would be the shoe that I would grab over other shoes if I had to go and run kind of 15, 20 miles in this shoe. And I think that's really kind of being the biggest thing that's come away from my experience with the Hyperion Elite 4. So there's definitely some positives here. I think it's a nice light shoe. I think it's a stable shoe. It's a smooth ride in general as well. And the outsole is great in it as well too. I just think in terms of what you're getting from that midsole and the overall kind of experience of running in it, I don't think it really kind of holds up just yet against those kind of top tier, even just below the top tier kind of, marathon shoes, kind of super carbon racing shoes. The carbon plate, I mean, I don't really notice it in a shoe in my time in it. I mean, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think, you want to kind of feel the impact of these components, and I'm not sure you really feel that in the Hyperion Elite 4. At least I haven't in my experience. So definitely some good qualities here. Definitely some qualities not so good that I think ultimately leaves me wondering and thinking that maybe Brooks needs a little bit of work to do, but it's definitely the foundations of a good shoe that, there's some areas that need tweaking, I think, going forward.
Now, in testing, I've done more than 50 miles in the Hyperion Elite 4. With the big highlights of that, I did a half marathon race test at the Barcelona half marathon when I ran my third fastest half at 1:25, a few days after recovering from a cold as well, so go me. I also did a 4-hour solo marathon test around the streets of London. You can find that video on the channel to see how I found this shoe for that. Go find it and watch that one. Beyond that, I've done interval sessions and some speed work in this shoe as well. Now, I know this shoe has come in for a lot of criticism for having a midsole that's just not as lively as the competitors in this space. And I'd have to say, overall, I agree with that kind of verdict on the shoe. It's definitely not as all-out punchy as the other top racers like the Alphafly, the Adios Pro 3, or even the Asics Metaspeed Sky Paris that we've been testing recently, another video on the channel you should watch. And if you're looking for that all-out, springy, energetic, bounce down the road feel, it doesn't have it. However, there are things that I like about this shoe. I like that it feels controlled and less wild underfoot. I enjoyed that there's an accommodating kind of consistency to the ride overall. It's a shoe where you sort of know what you're getting from mile 1 to mile 26. There's a balance to it that might suit some runners who are going into a marathon for that reason. It's certainly good if you're running a bit more tired, when some of the super shoes kind of hang you out to dry unless you're running in good form. I think this shoe takes a little bit more care of you, so it's a bit more accommodating in that sense. Now, if you also like to feel like your legs are working a bit harder in training, then I find this shoe is a kind of shoe that responds when you put more in. It's a shoe that you have to work a bit. It doesn't really work for you like some carbon shoes in the same way. And on that half that I did in Barcelona, it did exactly that. It certainly helped me to the 1:25, but it's not kind of like a springy, bouncy, cruise control kind of carbon shoe. You have to put something in to get something back. I did find it was good in the corners. That's another tick, no problem there. And by the end of the marathon test, it wasn't one of those carbon races that I couldn't wait to get off my feet. In fact, I actually commuted home on the train with them on, and that might tell you all you need to know about this midsole and how it performs. Now, I probably really wouldn't want to do that in an Alphafly, for example.
Verdict is that this is the best Hyperion Elite yet. It's Brooks' best racing shoe ever. It's certainly the shoe to opt for if you're sticking within Brooks' range and want a fast shoe, which actually I don't think was the case with Hyperion Elite 3. I kind of thought the Hyperion Max was a better racing shoe. Hyperion Elite is clearly the fastest shoe Brooks has. It's a pretty solid shoe. It is just outgunned by the other shoes on the market, I think, and that really does come down to the midsole foam. Like, this is a perfectly fine foam. It's okay. Like, when they first launched the nitrogen-infused DNA Flash in the Hyperion Elite 2, actually, well, it was probably in the Hyperion Tempo, it was pretty exciting foam. It was really lightweight, had a bit of bounce to it. It was novel, the idea of all this kind of supercritical foams and all that, but it's not novel anymore, and every brand has moved on, and they're delivering more impressive foams, usually using PIBA or some other impressive TPU or something, and it just gives you a bit more bounce, a bit more punch, and just the feeling on the foot that you expect from a super shoe. It also gives you more comfort over long distances because you have that softer, springier foam. This is a bit more stable, this foam, than those foams, but other than that, there's no real benefit to sticking with it, and the fact that Brooks is sticking with it means that I just don't think this is a carbon shoe of the standard of the other ones out there, when pretty much every other major brand now has launched what I would consider, a top tier or very close to top tier super shoe. Lots of very comparable shoes. Brooks is a little bit of an outlier here, and maybe that's good. Maybe some people prefer this firm ride and it'll work better for them. But even if you do find it more stable and all that, and it works well for racing as a result, you are still, I think, losing something in terms of performance with this shoe. Just a little bit. It's not a huge difference here, but I think it is enough to make it clearly rank a little bit lower than the other carbon super shoes. Now, And we had a problem if Brooks came in and priced this really competitively and whacked it in as a £150 shoe or something like that. But it's priced at the same level as those shoes, like things like the Vaporfly, the Meta Speed Sky Paris, the Saucony Endorphin Pro 4. I think those are just simply better shoes, and those are shoes I would use ahead of it for every kind of race. Even the Pro 4 is a good shoe to use for lots of training as well, I think. So while the shoe is better than past versions of the Hyperion Elite 4, I wouldn't even really say it's trending in the right direction, because if Brooks sticks with this foam, I think it's going to be very hard to deliver a shoe that's competitive. You know, they're maxed out the stack height now, they've got to complete everything in there, but the foam just doesn't deliver in the same way the foams on the best shoes do. So maybe we'll see a more drastic overhaul in the future. For now, enjoyed running a shoe. This is undoubtedly a fast shoe, but you're in a market now with amazing shoes from loads of brands, and I would just consider them better than the Hyperion Elite 4, and that means it's hard to recommend the shoe.
Verdict then, well, this is a case of nearly not quite, but there's some really positive things about this shoe. The uppers are great and light. I like the overall shape, geometry, the feel of the shoe on the foot. You know, I like the upper design. I like the fact that it feels lighter and it has a race feel to it. I like the slightly narrower platform that you've got here. And I think this is definitely one of Brooks' better shoes that I've run in, but it just doesn't quite deliver on that all-out super shoe feel. The midsole lacks that punch that a lot of people are going to be looking for, I think. It's almost got more like a super trainer feel than a carbon racer. And then let's be honest, the price for that makes this really hard to recommend. When you line it up against the kind of rivals out there, as a much less aggressive carbon shoe, it almost drops into that super trainer silo. But at £220, that's too much to pay when you can get a similar energy out of shoes like the Saucony Endorphin Speed 4. So for me, I think Brooks is still searching for that killer carbon racer, but I'd say that this one, the Hyperion Elite 4, gets closer than many of the previous attempts. There's a lot to like here. I think if they can nail the foam, keep the shape of the shoe, it would be a winner.
So my verdict on the Brooks Hyperion Elite 4. Now this is definitely a better shoe than a Hyperion Elite 3. So let's start with the positives. I like the fact that it's nice and light. I think the upper changes are a definite highlight here. I think the midsole is going in the right direction, and I think that's really important here. And, you know, there's other elements here that I think really work well on Hyperion Elite 4. And I think if you like a firmer feeling shoe, racing focus shoe, then I think there are things to like here. The problem I have with it is when you look at the price, and I think a lot of times when I was out running with it, I couldn't get away from how much this shoe cost, because it's sitting at £220. When you look at the shoes that are around that, you know, it's not that top tier carbon racing shoe price, but when you look at what it's up against or other things it's up against things like Saucony Endorphin Pro 4. And for me, these two shoes don't really compare in terms of my experience. I think it's kind of night and day. When you look at what that money can get you elsewhere, it's hard to justify what you're getting here in the Hyperion Elite 4. I think, you know, something like the Endorphin Pro 4 is just giving you a little bit more in terms of that feeling experience, that kind of propulsive feel, you know, giving you that versatility, also giving you a lot of the qualities here. Maybe isn't as light as the Hyperion Elite 4, but it's just giving you a lot more in terms of that feel of running in that shoe and running quick in that shoe. I still do think it's stuck in that kind of daily trainer kind of category here, which is not really what, you know, the price reflects here. And when you look at what else, those speedy up-tempo daily trainers, there's definitely better up-tempo daily trainers for me that you could potentially race in. Things like the Saucony Endorphin speed range. I think the Hoka Mac as well, you know, whether it's the 5, I haven't tested the 6, but, you know, the 5 I definitely think can work, probably half marathon distance as well, but it may be a push to go marathon, but it just gives you a little bit more, I think, over those longer runs. And then things like the New Balance Rebel V4, which I've just got in, I've just started testing, that is even less than kind of those shoes, and I feel like it's got a lot more, and already I feel like I'm going to get more out of that shoe over distance as well. So this is the problem with the Hyperion Elite 4. I think there are definitely some elements here that I think really work, but I think when you look at the price and what it's up against, it's hard to kind of justify it over other kind of marathon super shoes, I think, that are out there around that price. And then you drop down to those kind of daily trainer shoes, which I think is where it generally sits. I think there are options that you can train in and race in, and will just give you a nicer feeling overall. So I think, and Brooks would probably be open to admitting this, is that they've got a bit of work to do with their racing shoes. They kind of nail it on the kind of daily trainer cushion shoes, but I think in terms of performance shoes, there's things that need to be refined. And I think there's hallmarks of a good shoe here, but I think, you know, it's not quite there for me. And it's not a shoe, if I had a half marathon again or looking to a marathon, would this be a shoe that would be in consideration? I don't think it would, based on my testing. So definitely some good bits here about the Hyperion Elite 4, but ultimately I think it slightly misses the mark in terms of what you're getting for your money, and, you know, when you compare it to what else is out there. Okay, so there you have it. That is our multi-tester take on the Brooks Hyperion Elite 4. Now, if you've got any questions about this shoe, do let us know in the comments. If there are other shoes you want to see it compared to, let us know about that as well too. As always, like and subscribe, hit that little bell to find out about our latest videos, and yeah, we'll see you for the next Round Testers video.